what makes someone remarkable? Do you mind being described as the white people whisperer? What is the optimal age to get married?
That year was the first year that we ever heard a teacher talk about race.
Is the college application process fair?
You start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Is there like a cartoonist community? So many times when we go live with these things, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boom.
Beth Comstock, she has been at GE. She's a former vice chairman over there. She's been president in NBC Universal. She has a long list of accomplishments, not the least of which is writing an amazing book called Imagine It Forward. Beth, thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you. And I'll confess, I really like Almond Joys. I really do.
You must be in the minority, but now I know what I can send you. So you're going to be the one who I end up sending those to.
Mail them to me. I'll happily take them.
That's great. Well, you have a fantastic book that's been out for a little while now.
About 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. But I was going back through it, and it was so relevant for right now, because for people who don't know your full journey, one of the things that really stood out for me is how you have relied on your inner confidence and instinct in many ways. And you literally say in the book, like, we need to be better at listening to our instincts. And one of the things I think affects a lot of us is this imposter syndrome idea of just questioning ourselves and feeling the need to apologize for ambition, feeling the need to apologize for having a out of the box idea before we even talk about it. So I wonder if we could start there and just talk about some of the ways that you've overcome that for yourself, because I think that's such a fundamental part of your journey, as I know it from just having talked to you and from having read your book.
Yeah, it's a big question. Thank you. I would say I think inner confidence is something I still work on. I've struggled my whole life with confidence, but it is, to what you say, how I got around that was coming back to that sense of that inner voice, intuition, that hunch. I kind of made it my move, if you will, in the course of my career to go out and explore things and start to feel confident in that. Curiosity and discovery was egging me on. And through that, I got to get confident in seeing patterns, and with the patterns to start to feel you couldn't see the future, but you could at least start to see where things were starting to emerge and get a bit of certainly a competitive advantage in business, but get a early insight for questions and learnings you need to do to kind of keep pace with change. So that all came from, I think, just listening, like what am I good at? What do I like? I like to learn. I'm curious. I like discovery. And then working against those things of that other voice that's like, oh, that's so stupid. No one will ever believe you. What do you know? I mean, I had those voices too. And, you come back with a new idea and your colleagues look at you like, well, what do you know? Since when are you an expert in artificial intelligence? Well, I'm not. I've got to find people who are, but something's happening. Yeah. Listen, look. And that, I think led me to grab, again, skills, not only just the curiosity, but I'm a storyteller. So I had to learn to tell stories about it. So shorthand is just, you're working through all the tensions, the things you're good at and the things you need to be better at, and trying to quiet those voices either externally or internally that want to talk you out of going forward in that.
Well, and one of the things that you talk about quite a lot is the idea that when you don't know something and when you don't necessarily have that level of comfort, one of the ways to get it is by bringing in expertise, by bringing in that outside thinking, and by being the one who constantly sort of curates that. And if there's kind of a theme that I saw throughout the book, it was you wanting to do something bold and bringing in someone who could inject the inspiration or the fire behind that. I think you called them sparks.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about like, how do you identify those people in those moments, and is that something as a strategy you just kind of landed on, or was it something that you'd known for a long time?
No, I think it was trial and error that I got there. As I'm out in the world and the teams I was with, we were out discovering, getting better at pattern recognition. I mean, you come across people who have expertise. And as I said earlier, you go back to your team, your colleagues, and you go, look at what I found. And they're like, well, who are you? We don't know you in that capacity. So pretty quickly, you're like, I need to find people who have expertise in this. And bring them in. And often the expertise is not, I mean, yeah, they're subject matter experts, but their expertise may be just in getting my colleagues to look at a situation from a different perspective. So it's often just somebody who you want to confront an issue. You're sparking a different way of looking at it. And what I found helpful is because often these people aren't in your organization, they'll say whatever. They're defending an idea. They're making a case of something, and they're not looking to work in your company. So often those are the best engagements.
They don't have the baggage.
Right. And they're not looking for a consulting gig most usually. And your job, go ahead.
So they can afford in many ways to be honest. And there's
exactly.
value.
That's sort of what one of your filters is for a good spark, is you want them to be honest. Now, where sometimes the work you have to do as that spark wrangler, I guess, is you have to translate. And so a lot of my job in innovation and change became trying to translate. I called it an outsider inside. I had to be both outside and inside. And I had to be able to bring those sparks in and say to them, okay, like, I know your examples are consumer, but we're largely a B2B company. So can we work together a little bit to not always give them that consumer example? Is there another one? So you have to work a little bit up front so that the language is resonant, so that there's some common path, and vice versa. You know, with when the spark leaves, you got to turn to your colleagues and go, okay, how is that relevant to us? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What do we dismiss, and what challenges us? So you have to work both angles of that.
Yeah, and I love that idea of the spark wrangler. I think if you do end up doing the next book, maybe that's like, there's an idea in there, I think, because that's a skill. I mean, it really is. And I want to dig into some specific examples. I mean, one of the things that you did when you were at NBC Universal, I'm not even sure if it was NBC Universal at that point.
No, it was NBC Universal.
NBC. Okay, is you launched the NBC Experience Store. Which you talk about having had a lot of resistance to. People said, well, why would we put a store there? This could be such a waste of time and effort and money. And eventually it kind of became this tent pole, this really iconic thing in many ways. I think it was before 30 Rock and kind of before all of the stuff that brought publicity maybe to it a little bit more. But talk about that specifically that instance, but I'm more curious about just what you learned from pushing an idea that had a lot of people who just would tell you, that's not going to work. That's a waste.
Yeah, and you're right. That was pre the NBC Universal merger. And I learned this was a pivotal experience for me. And the team and I, we were so convinced we had to do this. NBC had launched Window on the World Studio, and we just had this vision. We want people walking around in New York with bags that say NBC Universal and taking the experience home. And we did our homework. We made this thing amazing. And we took it to the head of the network, Bob Wright, and said, pitched the idea. The CFO hated it. Bob said no. We made it better. We put little dioramas together. I pulled in a really integrated team. I mean, I have to say that would be one of the lessons, to try to bring as many voices in. It can't just be your idea or your small teams. We brought outside sparks. Long story is, we went back to Bob 3 different times. And he had said no. On the 3rd time, he finally said yes. And I learned a couple of things. One was, he was challenging us. He was trying to see, could we make the idea better, which we did. 2, he wanted to see how committed we were. And I can't tell you how many times in business I've seen this, where people pitch an idea the first time they're told no, and you never hear from them again. And you're like, but I thought you liked that idea. So for me, it became this mantra that I have just found so valuable ever since. This idea that no means, to me, I hear it. The first time I hear no, I have to reinterpret it as, oh, that must mean not yet. I have to find another way in. I have to find another path around. And I'm really grateful for that experience and Bob for teaching me that. And I remember he looked at me, and the team was there, and he looked at me and goes, look, I have tried so hard to say no. I did say no. But you guys made it so darn hard to say no. And, the CFO was no all the way. So he was overruling the CFO in saying that. And it was a bond we had. So we weren't going to let him down. And so there was also that kind of commitment that he was very honest with us that we passed the test, but it had been a test.
Yeah, and you talk pretty candidly in your book and in interviews about being a female executive in a largely male-driven industry and male-driven organization. At least it was. I'm sure it's changed now. But that kind of uphill battle added to the fact that I know this just having been in the world of PR and marketing. You were initially coming from the world of PR. And yeah. I think it's fair to say in most corporations, the people who work in PR tend to be minimized. They tend to be kind of stuck in a certain corner to say, look, you just get me media, and that's what you do. We don't expect you to be strategic. We don't expect you to do any of these bigger thinking items because you come from PR. And you overcame that as well. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit of what you learned along that path to sort of overcome these limiting factors, whether it was on your business card or just who you were.
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. I think to summarize it, I think it's just this epiphany at some point that, hey, difference actually works in my favor. Yes, it's intimidating to be the PR and then marketing person in a media or technology company. To be a marketer, to be a media person in a tech company. To be a woman in a largely male-dominated. I couldn't get away from the difference. That's who I was. And yet it's just maybe the marketer in me came to appreciate that difference is your unique value. And I, over time, just started embracing it. For one, what option did I have? That was the path I'd been on. I came that way to get there. I sure worked my butt off. I worked hard. I was good. So you couldn't take the work away from me on any one of those categories. But difference was my advantage. I looked at things differently. I brought a perspective that was outside the company, especially when I got into more and focused on marketing. It was about living in the market. That's what we do. That was what are the insights? Where's the world going? It turned out in both of those cultures, they were most big established companies, you get very insular. And so suddenly to be the outside person, the expert at where trends and customers and what people are saying, no one was doing that. So I just used my perspective and difference. And I just would encourage people to come back to that again and again. It's helped me in, currently I'm on a couple of boards, and that helps me when I'm in the boardroom at Nike. Luckily they're a good marketing company, but there's a lot of things I don't know about. And to be able to come in with a different perspective, that's why you're there. Ask questions differently. So that would be my encouragement to people who are sort of struggling with that. Your difference is your advantage. And then it became incumbent on me as I got to develop in my career and become a team leader, business unit leader. It meant I had to work hard to make sure I brought in more difference. And so you can become a beacon and start to attract more people who think differently, who have different paths. And suddenly your team has a bit of superpowers because you've aggregated these different perspectives. It's hard work. I don't want to diminish it. People laugh at you. They think what do you know? You somehow have to work through that, and it's difficult.
Yeah, and it's so common. You said this before. The question that always happens in B2B organizations when they see something outside of B2B, and the first thought is, well, show me a B2B example of the exact same thing. And it's so ironic. I joked at one point. I was doing a talk on the I think it was the South by Southwest stage, and I joked that there's no case study for innovation because by definition it hasn't been done before. And so this search for let me find a case study of something no one's ever done before to prove that we should do it is just inherently stupid, right? Yeah. I love this sense of just kind of fighting against the inside the box thinking and challenging people to kind of go outside of that. I would call it non-obvious thinking. I've got my own way of it, but it's basically the same thing, right?
It was non-obvious thinking. You're right. And I think, I'd love to say, oh, I'm just wired that way. I'm not. But after, doing it the other way and that didn't work, you start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Yeah, it does, because you challenge people to not dismiss something that is outside of what they know.
Right.
And I often say that we're living in this time where, really for the first time in human history, it's possible to be more informed and more narrow-minded at the same time, because you just read more and more of what you agree with.
That's why the work you're doing is so important.
Yeah, and it's so challenging for so many people, right? Because they just struggle to think that way. They struggle to embrace that style of thinking. Your story takes you on this journey through NBC Universal, through the mergers, through GE, and along the way, there's some pretty iconic experiences with known business leaders. I mean, you talk about the time when Jack Welch hung up on you, which I think is a great story. I mean, I want you to share that. I think it's just and what you learned from it, because I know that's one of the stories I've heard you talk about. Yeah, no,
I had a period of time when Jack Welch brought me into GE from NBC, and I got to work with him for about 4 years, and a lot of learnings from him. You know, he was a great leader in many ways, and he was a challenging leader in many ways, as has been well documented. But I always appreciate, I came out of NBC and media, and you know, in media, if you don't make it to air, you're dead. And so everything was rush to a deadline, and you start all over again. And so it created a certain urgency. And here he had billed himself as Mr. Speed and Efficiency. So he called me into his office one day and he said, "Hey, look, like, you got to wallow in it." What do you mean wallow in it? You got to take time. You just rush out of meetings. You're not getting to know people. Wallow in it. Trust me, you got to wallow in it around here. And I was like, you know, Mr. Speed, what are you talking about? Okay, I'll wallow in it. Well, a couple months later, I guess I hadn't wallowed in it, and he called me up on the phone, and I picked up the phone, and he wasn't there. So I called his assistant. I said, "Hello, hi, Jack," and the phone went dead. And I called his assistant. "Hey, Roseanne, I lost Jack." She goes, "Oh, you didn't lose him. He hung up on you because he wanted you to know that's what you are like." So I always appreciated, one, it was painful feedback, and I clearly wasn't heeding the teacher's advice, but he used humor, which I always appreciated. And more importantly, he took the time. He took the time to say, "Hey, you're not going to survive here if you can't work on this, and you're not going to grow." And I share it because it was a fun story, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, and sometimes we need those kind of moments to wake us up. I think we've got some comments coming in here, so I want to kind of turn to those. Got a question here from Jonathan. What do you feel the best ways to get an internal mechanism to feel comfortable with the outside perspective? So, you know, this leads me to actually one of the questions I was gonna ask you about as well, which is this idea of being a champion of those ideas. And you talk about the difference between being a champion and a mentor. So this is a great question from Jonathan. I mean, how do you get the organization to buy into that external perspective? Yeah,
Jonathan, it's really easy. You just say, "Because I said so." Okay, you know that's so.
Well, you can do that if you're Beth Comstock, but you know, maybe.
And there's so many times I did that. Either I said so or the boss says so, and then people are like, "Okay, I'm going to show you." So that's not the way you do it. But we often do that. You get into these wars of, I learned that at NBC very painfully. The last assignment I had there, we ended up being kind of the cool kids and the not cool kids. And we were arguing because we were more informed than the other. Like, try not to get into that. It's a bad recipe. So that's where you start. Try to come to your differences. I find it's often very, a couple of quick things to give you. Invite your critics in. You know who they are in the company, on your team, the people who are critical thinkers. I don't mean the downers who are no on everything. You've got another formula for them, but you invite a big critic in. If you can co-own an idea together, I mean, maybe it's your head of engineering, and you get your head of engineering, she finds a way that we never would have thought of, and suddenly she's a proponent of it, and she walks people through what she went through. That's a great way.
That's unusual right there. I mean, I remember at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you brought in some political analysts, and you actually brought in someone from the McCain campaign and the Obama campaign together at the same time.
Exactly. It was right after the financial crisis, and we brought in Steve Schmidt and David Plouffe, and they, frankly, in the beginning, I didn't tell them each we were working. But we ended up bringing them together in a very powerful way. That would have been another, transparency is always good. But it was so helpful to bring them in, and they each brought different perspectives, and their credibility, in some ways it was good too, because even then people were aligned politically, and to be able to not just say, oh yeah, I'm maybe more liberal, like, yeah, she brought in the Obama guy, to be able to bring in a Republican as well got people's attention. So I think be very deliberate in thinking about how you bring in unexpected voices that are going to help you build credibility. And the last thing I'd say to Jonathan as well is, try not to make it your idea. I mean, you're in some ways a midwife. You're bringing forth and helping facilitate this happening. And the more people feel that they have an option to make the idea better, the more they're going to want to be with you. Again, all those things sound really easy. They're not. And so your skill is, as a listener, a translator, a synthesizer, that keep coming back. You said, no, but I think I didn't explain this. Let me come back again. Let me bring this other voice. You know, that engineer, you thought she didn't like it. She actually does. So you're just constantly creating a surround sound that gives people different opportunities to hear it. Because often when you hear the idea the first time, you don't know what you're talking, you don't know what you're saying, and people don't understand it. You need to come back, if nothing else.
They're not in the moment to be able to really embrace it. And I think the moments is one of the things that I find fascinating about your journey as well. You talk about the choices that you made to either move the family from one place to another, to take a role. You're maybe one of the, I don't know if it's a few people or a lot of people, but you're one of the people who turned down Steve Jobs for an offer to work at Apple.
At least the few idiots who's admitted it.
Yeah, right. Now, but I mean, you had a pretty good run otherwise, so I don't think anybody could look at that and say, "Man, you're living in a cardboard box," and you could have been person number 400 at Apple or whatever it was, right?
Studying under Tim Cook.
Yeah, but talk a little bit about. I mean, I would love to know just your personal model for making those types of decisions, which are big in the sense that they impact you and your life and your family's life, but also they're just kind of big directional calls, right? Do I take the role at NBC and leave GE, which are totally different worlds? Do I leave the world of media and go back into the, I think you called them the industrialists, right, of GE? Do I turn down Apple? Like, how do you think about those types of big decisions and break them down? And then as you look back, do you say, oh man, like, I should have done that? Or do you sort of say, look, the past is the past. Like, I'm always moving forward.
Yeah, it's a little of all those things, but it's where we started. I think it's really feeling comfortable with your voice, and you have to go through a process to do that. So I actually kept the worksheet I did when I was considering going to Apple twice, I might mind you. And I basically do your typical pros, cons, and then I solicit advice. I mean, my husband gets the brunt of most of this. He's like my personal therapist too often. But I ask a lot of different people who I respect, what would you do? And then I just consider it. Okay, all these different points of view are helpful, and I write it all down, and then I literally tuck my paper away. I go to sleep, and I say, okay, when you wake up tomorrow, you're gonna make a decision. Once decision is made, it's like my first instinct. I'm gonna take it. I'm not. I'm not going back. I mean, yeah, there are going to be times, that Apple stock price goes crazy. I'm going to be, but I made it for good reasons. I mean, in that case, my daughter threatened she was going to turn goth, which I actually think would have been good for her. But
you joke that if that's the worst, that
it would have been good for her. She could have, that would have helped. But so yeah, there are all those considerations, but ultimately, you just and decision made, and that's it. You can't look back. And in some ways, you're encouraging yourself to make that path better because you've picked the path. So now you only have a choice to make it work.
You're all in, right? I mean, that's the way you describe it.
You have to be.
I got to ask you, when you did that pros and cons list about working at Apple, was working with Steve Jobs in the pro con or the pro column or the con column?
A little of both. I mean, obviously, he wasn't quite the Steve that we've all come to mythologize. This was just before they launched the iPhone. I mean, he was so charming and engaging, and everyone I knew who worked for him said he was amazing, but he even in the process was making decisions about things that he thought I would say or do or want, and I didn't, in the end, I felt I wouldn't be able to be the kind of person and have the kind of curious career I wanted to there. that was ultimately one of the factors. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think that's it's just a really interesting thing. So maybe where we could close, just to kind of bring the conversation. I hate to even end it, but I definitely want to ask you about something that I think is kind of a big movement on many levels that's been happening in business right now. I mean, you and your career and your success has been an inspiration for a lot of people, myself included, but especially a lot of women. And one of the things that we see all the time is professional networking groups for women to find mentors and champions of their own, groups that are helping to find more diversity in either corporate boards or executive ranks. And this whole push towards just including the more diverse perspectives. I wonder if you could just talk about how you've seen that progress, and whether you think that there are things we all should be doing that maybe we are just at the cusp of, right? I'm wondering, like, to use the tagline, the title of the book, like, how could we imagine this forward, right? Like, what would be the path forward for that?
Yeah, good question. A couple of things. I mean, I do believe in networks and groups like that. It's a way to, they become spaces where you can learn from people who've had similar experiences. So, you know, that's often helpful. I found networks good because you can test different sides of yourself out, be a leader in a different way. I'm a believer in those, but they're not enough. And in too many organizations are set up to make have the networks do all the work, and other people get off the hook. And so I don't think that's right. And so what do we have to do? I mean, start where you are. If one, try to work on kind of your story, how difference is an advantage for you. Two, if you're in a position, whether you're leading a team, a project, you know, an assignment, make sure you're being in and seeking diverse voice. Often it's worth waiting, and usually it's worth waiting for. So there's a big rush, but make sure you're clear about bringing in diverse voices any way you can, even if it's just inviting a speaker in to talk to your team. Really spend time working on that advocate. I guarantee you it's a way to be innovative. So we have to fight harder, Rohit. That's just the answer. It's not, there's been a lot of attention, but we're not done. And anyone who thinks we are, like, we're not. And so every one of us, and the non-obvious choices make it even better. The people who are least diverse, fighting for more diversity, carry incredibly strong messages. So, so just do it, and people will follow that. I've seen it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's such a powerful message, and so important, because I think that oftentimes we minimize the importance of diversity to just be, okay, if we hire one person who is of color or just looks different, like, we're done. And that's never enough, because it doesn't lead to diversity of thought, right? We don't get people from other industries. We don't bring people from different backgrounds who grew up differently than us. You may have lots of people.
You're never done. I mean, you have two marketers on the team, you need non-marketers. You need too many extroverts, you need introverts. I mean, you're just constantly working what diversity and upping your game of diversity. I mean, you're never done. That's what I think. If you're waiting for some, like, industry award to say you're the most diverse team, company, like, you're on the wrong path. Yeah.
Important reminder. I mean, this is lots of great insights, very important experiences that I think all of us can learn from. So I just want to say thank you for spending a little bit of time with our group, with our non-obvious listeners and watchers. Yeah, I appreciate you. Beth Comstock, everyone, sharing some amazing insights. I hope you enjoyed the show. As a quick reminder, every week we share another non-obvious, fascinating guest, as well as the most interesting stories of the week to get you to think, and ones that you might have otherwise missed. So, it's Rohit Bhargava saying thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of our non-obvious nation. And remember, always stay non-obvious.